Hey everyone, I'm Abby with Spiceworks, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Spiceworks Partner Webinar, 5 Reasons to Monitor Employee Computer Usage Now and 1 Reason Not to. Brought to you by Spectrasoft. Before we get started, I wanted to draw your attention to the question box on your screen. Here you can type in as many questions as you'd like, and our presenters will try to get to as many as possible at the end of the presentation. Also, we will be recording the webinar, so if you have to step away for any reason, you will receive an email with a link to the recording in about a week. So now that we have all the housekeeping done, I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Mike Tierney, who's the Vice President of Operations at Spectrasoft. And we also have Matt Farr, who's the Senior Sales Engineer for Spectrasoft. So guys, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thank you, Abby. And thank you to everybody for carving some time out of your day to join us today. So you can do the voices with the name. This is Mike. Matt, say something.
How are you guys? Welcome.
Excellent. And later we will be asking Matt to do his Sean Connery impression as we teased out in the abstract for this. So you want to make sure you stay tuned for that. So let's talk today about some of the use cases that are popular within our customer base. You want to agenda slide? And just as a shameless plug, we are deployed by approximately 36,000 companies in 113 countries. We want to talk about some of the things that may not be as obvious as the more commonly known use cases, and we'll talk about some of those as well. Talk a bit about some of the reasons to look at implementing an employee monitoring program, a little bit on the challenges, and we'll have something for you at the end of the webinar that you guys can take home and read through a little bit later as well. So with that said, we're going to start off by talking about one of the most common use cases that people have for our software: investigations, right? The quest for the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, and why. We can also help with the how too, but because how starts with an H, it's shamelessly discriminated against when talking about the 5 W's. So let's jump right into it. And we are going to start today a little bit differently than other webinars that I've done. So we're going to bring up a live instance of our product here in a minute. And I promise we're not going to demo this thing to death, but I did want to show you guys how easy it is to find something out. And talking about an investigation, that's what an investigation is. It's all about trying to find out the facts about something in order to learn what happened, right? And they're a fact of corporate life. There's generally a couple of different kinds of investigations. There are formal ones that are triggered by HR, possibly a complaint or some other process that's been triggered. And then there are more informal kind of do we have a problem type investigations that are typically driven by something out of the norm. And we're gonna go through an example of that today as we try to show you that while investigations are a fact, they don't have to be expensive, they don't have to be time consuming, they don't have to derail your day. As IT professionals, you've got a lot of other things that you'd rather be doing than helping pull information together to support an investigation. So we want to show a little bit about how we can minimize the impacts on you on that, and how we would enable very detailed information, because in any investigation, whether in this context or any other, the more detailed your information, the more accurate the result is going to be. So with that said, Matt, why don't we bring up the product briefly here, and we're going to walk through, as I said, a kind of an informal investigation and how we can kind of help get to the bottom of something quickly. So Matt, if I were to ask you if we had a sales rep and they downloaded a bunch of files, is that good or bad?
I would generally say that raises suspicion. In certain industries, it's probably very suspicious, right?
Okay. Now, my response to that would be we don't know because we haven't established a baseline yet, right? True. I may have a rep that's downloaded a bunch of files, but I got to see what's the norm for the company. So what are we looking at up here?
Well, in that scenario, what I've brought up here is one of Spectra 360's quick view panels. These quick view panels allow you to configure essentially an overview of your aggregated data from your environment. So here I'm seeing users that are transferring the most information off the network. So that could be your file shares, your file servers, things of that nature. And generally we see that, my users are within this lower range, under 2, maybe over 2, maybe up to 4, but Tara here is pushing the limits here. Her activity is extremely abnormal. And that's the type of information you can see with these quick view panels, is you can get a 10,000-foot overview of what is happening in your environment and then see what is sticking out, what doesn't make sense.
And so Matt, once we've looked at this, maybe we've been deployed for a couple days, we've looked at this, we've established a baseline, in this case, call it 4, right. We can set an alert, right, that says show me when people are exceeding this baseline. So you don't have to come into the product and look all the time. You could wait for an alert to kick off.
Correct. We could have an alert here that says, if one of my users has an event that is downloading or transferring more than X amount of files, notify these individuals.
Right. So a lot like other monitoring solutions out there, network monitoring, this is just tied to the specific activity of a user. So, so now we've established that we have somebody that's downloaded an abnormal amount of data. So we want to take a closer look at what's going on there. I'd call it a curiosity at this point more than anything else. So, so walk us through how we would take a look at what it is that Tara's doing.
So at that point, all I would need to do is select that portion of my chart here for Tara and open up the individual events for Tara. And when I do that, I immediately see within my events pane network events off my document path, which is my price list share in this example, and Tara's clearly working in taking confidential price list data from my share, which for her role in our organization, Mike, would be abnormal.
Yeah, no, so that starts to look like a red flag to me, because we can look and say, well, Tara doesn't work in all these states, and what's she doing pulling down all this data?
Right.
So what we want to do now is go further in, right, and try to say, what is Tara doing with this data? Because in and of itself, as of yet, we don't have a problem.
Right, so we could say, at this point, this is suspicious. Let me take a look at exactly what Tara is doing at this point. And I can do that by the screenshot functionality, where I can go right to the event and look at or get a visual, essentially, of what Tara is doing at that point in time. And that shows me, everyone on the line here can see, there's the network path, my file server, my share, price list, there's my confidential data, and here in the other Explorer window, looks like she's moving that to my documents. So obviously, that's not a normal behavior for one of my sales reps. And if I look at the other corner of the screen, I also happen to notice something that we can see with the screenshots, and sometimes it may lead us to other information. Yep. I'm also seeing that she's got a Gmail account open in the background. So, Mike, if I'm seeing a user copying data from my network to her local machine while she's got a personal webmail account open, what would you say to that?
It's starting to look bad, right? And now I'm starting to look, and I'm trying to figure out why my super cool sales rep that always hits her numbers is doing these kinds of things. So walk us through a little bit further, and let's see what happened next.
So then we'd want to obviously, we correlate the data at this point. So now we're saying, well, we need to take a look at Tara's email activity then, because obviously that's concerning that she's working with confidential price lists, and at the same time she's got a webmail account open. We would be able to drill right into Tara's information, and we'd be able to see all her event data. But in particular, I'm interested in this email activity. And then I see here, basically as proof here are the confidential price lists included all the state spreadsheets. So there's our proof using the webmail that she is indeed sending out those spreadsheets.
All right, so now this looks particularly bad, and maybe we have somebody who's getting ready to leave or something like that. But we also can see in the from address up in those emails and the from name, we can see the name of the person she's interacting with, right? And what we know, this is a company that we work at, is that Frank Pantangeli is an employee of the company.
Right.
So now maybe this isn't quite as bad as we thought it was. So can we go back in time a little bit and try to figure out what prompted Tara to email a bunch of confidential price lists using her Gmail account? Right, or at least to Frank's Gmail account, right?
Of course. So now, again, we're tying these events together. So at this point, we can then go to Frank and say, well, how is Frank involved in this? And we can see within Frank's email activity right away, well, there it is, Mike. He asked Tara to do that because he's traveling, he's got a problem, his hard drive failed, and he needed the data for a presentation and to work with a partner. So. And it even asked her right there, please send it to my Gmail account, which was a suspicious account to begin with.
Yeah, so what we did in about 2 minutes, we would have gone a little faster if we weren't talking so much, was we saw an anomaly, we drilled into it, we figured out what caused that anomaly, and then we were able to see the context going on around that, the why an event happened. In this case, Tara's helping out her boss, everything's fine, turn all the red lights off. It's not a positive thing that we have to take care of, or a positive alert, a negative connotation that we have to take care of. There's no false positive here because we can see all the context and we move on with our day.
Correct.
Right? So that's a quick example of how our software is being used every day to help people understand what's going on within their environment. And we help a lot of companies out with things like IP theft, with data leaks and those types of things. And this is an example of how quickly you can get in and figure out exactly what happened, who did something, why they did it. And that's really the important part, is the why. When you can see that context, you're in a much better position in an investigation.
Absolutely.
All right, do you want to jump back over to the deck? So that's investigations. And I said we want to talk about, at the outset, we're going to talk about 5 different reasons to consider implementing employee monitoring, and then we'll talk about one not. So reason number 2 is getting sued sucks, right? I think everyone would agree with that statement. So one of the use cases that we are frequently employed for in our base is termination protection. And let me stop here and say I'm not an attorney and I'm not qualified to give legal advice, and you shouldn't listen to me in that context, but hey, that's not advancing. Wrongful termination suits, right? These are on an increase across the country. I'm good. And they can be quite expensive for companies. So we did some research on this. Defending against a wrongful termination suit, can cost anywhere from $175,000 up to $250,000. Very common numbers. So of course, I think the biggest, scariest one, I put that on the slide. But these are difficult cases to defend against. Again, they're becoming more prevalent. We live in a litigious society. What I found is that companies that do a really thorough job of documenting reasons for dismissal have a better chance of winning summary judgment, right? It's not easy to win that, right? Summary judgment is it's a procedural device. It's used in litigation to dismiss a case or dispose of a case without a trial, and it's used when there's no dispute on the facts of the case. So the judge can look at it and say, no, one party clearly has made a claim that is not borne out by the facts, so I'm not going to let this advance. Well, it costs a lot of money even just to get the summary judgment. That can cost $75,000, $100,000. But if you can head these things off at summary judgment, you could be looking at saving your company, a 6-figure number by being able to head off some of these cases from going to trial. And you're also just building up better evidence should you have to go to trial. So termination protection is something that we see quite often in our base, and we actually have a case study that's available on our website, and that's from a company, IMV Projects. And this was a guy who came to us because he had a legal situation going on with a former employee, and he had to gather information to try to support the company's case. We were not being used at the time, so he's used Windows and other email utilities, and he was able to pull together investigation, but he couldn't get everything together, and it took a lot of time. And I think, as you guys are looking at those words on the screen, those of you who have been asked to do this know exactly, what the gentleman from IMV Projects is referring to. And, I've been the guy that's had to walk into, an IT administrator's office and ask them to drop what they're doing to help with an investigation, and I've seen the eye roll and the deep sighs when everything up on the whiteboard becomes just a pipe dream that they're going to get done today. Matt, I know you've had some experience in this. What are some of the things that people have to do from a native tools perspective to pull the type of information together that we can just pull out with a couple of clicks?
Well, it's very difficult, and I think the biggest thing that you run into is there's nothing in place ahead of time, so you end up having to go back and try to gather as much electronic data as you can, which ends up, in a lot of cases, becoming a forensic investigation, which can be very costly, and there's holes, Sure, I can go, if I'm running Exchange or internal email, sure, I can maybe go back to the mailbox store and pull archived email and see what I can piece together. But who's even using that if there is something suspicious going on? Like we just saw in our example, Tara was using Gmail. So that's not something, we can track through our internal systems. Our log file management. Do we have everything enabled within our logs even to see information pertaining to file accesses and things of that nature? And if we do, how much information are we really getting? Are we just saying that, okay, yeah, they access this file? Well, maybe they they need to access that file on a daily basis, so you don't really have the data that says, well, maybe they took that file and they attached it to an email and sent it. We don't know that. So there's a lot of holes, and you identify these violations or these concerns, you then have to submit proof. And if there's holes in that proof, there really isn't much we can confirm or qualify.
Yeah.
So unlike when you have a monitoring solution in place that allows you to see the ongoing activity and have that visible evidence, you're trying to piecemeal something together that sometimes may or may not happen.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit later on about some options for how you could have something in place. So that's a good. We'll come back to that point. So that's reason number 2 is termination protection. Maybe something that you guys hadn't thought about in the past. Reason number 3 is something that we've been talking about quite a bit here at SpectraSoft, and we've talked about it with the community before, and that's the insider threat. And when I started putting this together and thinking about insider threats, it kind of reminded me, there's that horror movie where somebody's calling and they think there's somebody out to get them, and when they finally get the police to trace the call, the horrible thing comes back and say, the caller's already inside the house. And I actually had to go look, and apparently it's this movie When a Stranger Calls from 1979. But I think I did watch this when I was a kid, and I think it was a scary movie. But the insider threat, we're talking about people that are on the inside, right? The insider threat defined is somebody that has authorized access, but they use that access in an unauthorized way, right? So insider threats are very difficult to defend against, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is just a trust factor, right? And let's talk about that for a minute. We're talking about fellow employees, right? And there's a level of trust with people that we work with and that we employ.
Right.
And I don't mean to suggest that we should just absolutely not trust anybody. I kind of think that the trust but verify school of thought is the right way to go about things. We see too many cases where insiders have either walked out with IP at the end of their tenure with a company, or other things are happening. Hacktivism is on the rise, and it's not really so much about monitoring everybody with the presumption that everybody is possibly guilty as it is to protect the vast majority of employees who are coming in and working in the best interest of the company and doing the best they can to forward their interests and the company's interests. And you don't want someone else to negatively impact the good employees because they've committed fraud, and the stats on what that can do to a company's bottom line are truly staggering. So that's one of the reasons that people have a little bit of trouble with insider threats. The other is that traditional solutions are architected to defend the perimeter or to prevent unauthorized access. So it's very difficult to see that somebody who's supposed to be in a system is doing something wrong, right? One of the fascinating things in the Edward Snowden case, as bits and pieces of information have trickled out, is that he was employed. One of the jobs that he was given was to move highly sensitive data off of one intranet site to a more secure location. So they hired this guy to move sensitive information. So it's going to be very, very difficult to start setting red flags on that because he's just doing his job, right? But with an active monitoring program in place, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides, you can actually prevent that type of stuff from happening. One of the other things that one of my colleagues pointed out to me when we were prepping for this is that there's been a lot of research around punishment and deterrence and how you deter somebody from doing something wrong. And what the research suggests is that certainty of punishment is a far more effective deterrent than the severity of the punishment. So increasing the severity of a punishment doesn't have that much effect. These studies were done on crime rates, but increasing the certainty of punishment does have a deterrent effect. And I found that was very interesting. So there's these two scholars on deterrence, Daniel Nagin and Greg Pogarski, and what they've concluded is that punishment certainty is far more consistently found to deter crime than punishment severity. And I started thinking about that in the context of what we do and some of the use cases that we see. And one of the most startling statistics we deal with is the number of employees that think it's okay to take company IP with them when they leave the company. We've done surveys. Other respected firms like Symantec have done surveys. you can go out on the internet and see the numbers, but it basically boils down to about 1 out of every 2 think that that's okay. And there are different reasons. Not all of them are malicious. Some of it is almost a natural, hey, I wrote that belongs to me. Not as much as the company, but it really is company IP, depending on how your employment agreements are structured. I created all those contacts in my territory. Those are my contacts. So I'm going to take them with me to my next job, right? And if that next job is at a competitor, well, that's not really in the best interest of the company. So if you're departing employees, 1 out of every 2 think it's okay, typically take this data, around when they give notice, and you can look to Carnegie Mellon and the CERT Insider Threat Institute, and they've done a bunch of research and built models that suggest that the vast majority of that occurs within 30 days of giving notice. Well, if employees knew that activity was monitored and that there was a certainty that that IP theft would be detected, I think we'd see those kinds of statistics change very rapidly. So that was some interesting stuff, and we always like to try to pass along some stuff. That was something that I didn't know about, and hopefully that was interesting for all you folks out there. So insider threat defense is a very common and growing use case that we're seeing, and certainly had a lot more attention since Edward Snowden popped up on everyone's radar screens. Reason number 4 for considering implementing an employee monitoring solution: more is better, right? In most cases, more is always better, right? And what we're talking about here is productivity, right? And it's not only just are people working hard. There are other use cases, and we're going to talk about 2 of them here. But one of the real interesting things, there were some studies done this was studies done in the 50s on data that was assembled actually in the 20s and 30s on a company called Hawthorne. It was a Western electric company outside of Chicago, and what it showed was that subjects improve or modify their behavior in response to know they're being observed, right? And the studies then evolved around different kinds of lighting and different feedback meetings with managers. And then that was played forward, and let me stop for a second and just say that the Hawthorne effect, like any good academic exercise, is not without controversy, so there are people that are dismissive of it. But this school of thought has stayed, and we've seen, as recently as just a couple of months ago, study done, and then there were some articles written in the New York Times, and we have the bit.ly links up here if you guys want to go out and grab the source material. But they published a study on behavior of employees in restaurants, and restaurants run typically at very tight margins, and even a little bit of theft, or in a restaurant, I was a bartender for a bunch of years, giving out a couple extra free drinks to pad the tip jar, can really impact that industry. Industry analysts estimate losses from employee theft are about 1%, and restaurant profit margins typically run about 2 to 5. So it's very, very material. So in this exercise, tracking software was put in place that really let them track everything. And if you ever watch like the show Bar Rescue on TV, you can see, they can tell the amount of alcohol that came out of a bottle by weight. It's pretty scientific stuff that they're using these days. And what they found is that the savings from the theft alerts themselves, when they actually detected somebody either giving something away or making an extra sandwich to take home, were very, very modest, like $100 a week per restaurant. But revenue in the restaurants increased by about 7% on average on a weekly basis from monitoring. So they looked a little bit deeper into that, and they said they really didn't get the benefit from stopping people as much from stealing things, but from changed behavior. People that knew they were being monitored, they not only pulled back on, questionable practices like, putting one out on the arm to pad the tip jar, but they also channeled their efforts into, prompting customers to sell it. Why don't you get dessert? Why don't you have another drink? And that raised revenue for the restaurant, and that in turn raised tips for them. So that had real big benefits across the board. And it's a very interesting study, a little bit outside of what we do, but thematically it's in the same place. So found that very interesting, and we've found that throughout our customer base. And there's another case study up on our website that you can find. It's for the Blackburn Rovers, an English League soccer team, and you can see a very short quote up from Ben Haler. The case study is a real interesting one. They had been looking at web filtering software to try to cut down on just some egregious web abuse, and none of that really worked for them, so they ended up with Spectre 360, and productivity really spiked up dramatically. Instances of non-work related activities went down, and they've been very pleased with the effects that they've had. And again, you can go out and download that case study. But that's one of the very common use cases, if not the most common use case that we see, is productivity increases being driven by our software. Reason number 5 for thinking about implementing a employee monitoring solution is because not only is more better, but better is better. And I don't think anyone would argue with me on that. And you know, there's productivity in the classic sense when we talk about, are people working hard, or are we getting everything that we pay for? But then there's also efficiency, and that's a productivity play as well, right? And you know, Celeste O'Keefe is one of our customers. She's CEO of Dancehall Multimedia. You know, she was quoted as saying that monitoring allows employers to view where employees are struggling and tailor training materials or sessions to better address those issues, and that leads to a productivity increase. So that as I was going through our case studies and reading through them, that got me thinking a little bit, and I spent some time out on the internet, and you know, I found a great article on 7 reasons why people leave companies, and reason number 3 was that there's too little coaching and feedback, right? So a lot of companies talk about making their managers better coaches, but more than 60% of employees say they don't get enough feedback, right? And that leads into a lot of performance problems. A lot of managers like to give feedback once a year when they do performance appraisals. You know, I'm quoting from the article that I read right now, but that's akin to the basketball coach telling his players at the beginning of the season, you go out and play 30 games, at the end of the season I'll tell you how you're doing. Right? It just doesn't work that way in the real world. So, you know, up on the screen here we have some examples of some legendary coaches, right? These guys knew how to coach and mentor and get the most out of their players, their employees. So Tom Landry, John Wooden in the middle, and then Vince Lombardi, who was such a great coach, they named a trophy after him. But you know, one of the things that's interesting is you can look at the tool that Vince is using to coach his players, and it's a chalkboard, and I believe we have been employing similar technology since caveman times. Well, technology has evolved, and now you look at the way that athletes' performance is impacted, and you know, video analysis is a huge deal now. And I can tell you, a good friend of mine's son plays competitive Little League baseball down here, and they're doing some of this at the Little League level now. But you know, certainly up at the professional level, they're doing very sophisticated analysis on pitchers' motions, like up on the screen here, on swings. This happens in golf. It happens in sports across the board, and you can see how they're able to pinpoint, isolate, and figure out exactly where a problem lies. So they might be able to tell you your elbow is flying out of your delivery, or you're tipping your pitch, and improve somebody's performance. Well, as you saw earlier when Matt had the product up, we can provide a video playback capability, right? And it's a very powerful tool for managers to be able to use to go in and show employees, look, I think we might be able to do this better, or we've taken a look at how the top performers are going about their business, and there's a difference in how you're going about it, so here's some tips you can use. You can use that to structure training programs, but it's really about using all the tools at your disposal to make sure that employees are set up for success, as opposed to assuming that they're not doing something they should be doing, or that they're doing something wrong. And that's something that we're seeing more and more from our customer base, is using the tool as a feedback mechanism to really be able to go in and take a look at what their employees are doing. And up here is a quote from one of our customers. Again, the case study is available online. And this is exactly what they're doing. So you can see they use the recordings during reviews, and they're able to call out things and help people improve and really set them up for success. And I think that's actually one of the more interesting use cases that we see, and not something that, you know, necessarily hits people in the head and they go, well, that was obvious about employee monitoring. So I wanted to share that with you. So those are 5 reasons we wanted to talk about why you should consider employing a monitoring solution. So let's talk about what is the number 1 reason why people don't. So I put it up here. The anti-reason number 1, and we hear it in different ways, but it's Big Brother, it's privacy, it's that this approach is just too intrusive for us. And that's understandable, and there are reasons for it. But we took a look at our customer base, well, how could this many companies be comfortable doing this? So we wanted to see what kind of attitudes were out there. So we ran some surveys using a tool that allowed us to target workers making over a certain dollar figure that we tried to use as a threshold to help us ID knowledge workers. And these were not our employees, not employees of our customers. We reached out to random sample. And the first time we ran the survey, and you can see the question up on the screen, if your employer monitored your work and personal activities on your company-issued device, would it be acceptable? And down the lower right-hand corner, you see 79% of people surveyed said yes, that would be acceptable. That kind of flew in the face of, kind of common wisdom. So we ran this. This was a survey of 200 people. So we ran it again on another 200 people, completely different, distinct sample set, and we got back effectively the same result. So 79%, 77%. I was a philosophy major, not a math major, but I'm pretty comfortable saying 78% here feel that it's acceptable to do. And I think that there are reasons for that. One is that attitudes towards privacy are shifting, right? I'll point it out to some people here. There's a toll road that it's faster for me to get home on, and every time I go through the toll booth, something just would catch my eye. On kind of the driver's side of the car, and I was never quite prepared to see what it is. And then one day I was determined I'm going to figure out what's going on, and I realized it's a flash bulb, and every time I go through the toll booth, they're taking my picture. And that's happening everywhere. Traffic cameras are everywhere. And so people are just becoming more used to, monitoring taking place, and we see benefits from it, right? And one of them, that Boston Marathon bomber is a great case of a benefit from this. Not a great thing that happened, but how quickly they were able to identify who those folks were using traffic cameras and security cameras, right? And that led to a much quicker resolution. The other thing is I think employees kind of expect it, right? I mean, I've never worked in a company where I didn't have to acknowledge the company's right to monitor, right? Whether it was on a document you signed at the beginning or on a notification that you click on log on. Companies have a right to do this. Employees know they have a right to do it. And I've found interesting examples in my career where acceptance becomes wider of this type of thing. I worked at a company in a previous life where a collaboration software solution was set up, and people were moving in there and they were setting up private rooms to discuss things, M&A transactions, and there was some controversies ginned up over the fact that administrators could see the discussions taking place in these private rooms if they wanted to. So one of the senior folks on the IT side ended up getting on a call to discuss people's concerns, and she asked how collaboration took place before this solution was put in place. The answer was overwhelmingly via email, and then she asked, is there anybody on the phone who does not think the Exchange administrators can see your email if they want to? And there was kind of silence and some embarrassed looks around the rooms. So I think that people are just becoming more accepting of it, and then people are also seeing the benefits of it, right? And we talked a little bit about that earlier. So, the key is to monitor for things that you need to know about as a company. And every organization defines need based on their own situation, and we understand that, and we're trying to take the lead here in presenting options to the market that let companies accomplish their goals, but achieve the balance between security and privacy, or productivity and privacy, whatever your goals may be, that are right for their organization. So take a minute here just to talk, for those of you not familiar with us, about what we do. Just before I jump into that, if you're kind of hesitating on implementing an employee monitoring solution, think about the impacts of doing nothing. Think about the impacts not, necessarily to the person who might, be caught doing something untoward, but the impacts to all the other folks that are doing the right thing for the company, and what would happen if something were to go unchecked. Make sure you have your acceptable use policy in order. We try to say this on every call that we do. That's where you want to disclose to employees that you have the right and the ability to monitor communications on company-owned devices and on the corporate network, and then make sure you align your strategy to your goals, and we'll talk a little bit about that. One of the steps in doing that is to find a solution that offers options, right? So what we do here at SpecterSoft is collect a lot of data on things that are going on in the online and communications fabric of your company. And up on the screen here, you can see all the different types of data that we can collect. The product is capable of collecting. But architected into the solution are options for you as customers. So you can choose to record keystrokes or not, depending on your goals. You can decide that you're really not worried about which websites people visit because you're really more worried about the movement of sensitive information on your network, so you're just not going to record what people are doing online. Or you may step further back from that and say, well, I'm a little bit worried about what people are doing online. I don't want anything inappropriate to happen in the workplace, but I don't want to get into my employees' business. I don't want to be recording when they're on their online banking site or in their E-Trade account. So you can go in and tell the product, don't record on those sites, and it just won't. So there's a lot of different privacy protections woven into the solution. What we've done recently is release a new product. So we now have kind of two approaches to monitoring to let companies kind of make the decisions that are right for them. So Spectre 360, our flagship product, is an active monitoring solution. And what active employee digital activity monitoring includes is having a solution in place that records employee digital activity, and then that data is collected centrally and it's available for review, reporting, and retention, right? Sometimes it's referred to as employee surveillance, and it's typically employed where there's a cause to do so. So as we were researching, through talking to customers and looking at the market, this latest solution that we rolled out, we uncovered three main types of cause where companies are comfortable tilting the balance and taking a closer look at what employees are doing. One, we kind of touched on earlier, and that's investigatory cause. So you have a reason to suspect that something may be going on that may not be in the best interest of the organization, so you need to take a closer look at it. It's similar to probable cause in the criminal justice world, and companies are kind of time-honored. They will go in and through whatever methods they employ, go take a closer look at what an employee is doing. Another cause that we uncovered is what we've labeled as role-based cause. And there are some positions within the organization that have elevated privileges. This may be sensitive ground on this call because I suspect many of you do. But we have highly privileged users or super users that have access to basically the keys of the kingdom within the company, and because of that, they have a disproportionate ability to do damage. And whereas the overwhelming number of system administrators and DBAs are just great people, you do see the Snowdens of the world, and you can see the kind of damage that they can do, and we've seen them in corporate America as well. So we see a lot of our customers using an active monitoring approach, and it's not unlike the random searches in an airport, where as everybody's going through the machines to whether it's a metal detector or the full body scanners, people get pulled out at random for a pat down or the machine gets wiped down. There's no checkpoint moment in IT. We don't have that moment where we could say we want to stop and check somebody. But we talked about deterrence and certainty earlier. If we're monitoring the activity of highly privileged users and randomly reviewing that information and make it known. Don't do it behind the scenes. Make people know that just because of your role and the access you have, you kind of fall outside the normal checks and balances of the system. We employ a higher degree of scrutiny. It has a very, very powerful deterrent effect. So role-based cause and investigatory cause are two of the three. And then the last was conditional cause. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. Conditions where you might want to take a closer look at the actions of an employee. So we talked about employees leaving an organization, or maybe somebody that's already left the organization. And do you want to know what they did right before that? We have the statistics and the models that show that that's when people take IP. So you want to take a closer look at them because the condition exists that suggests, 1 out of every 2 think it's okay to take it. You probably need to take a closer look at what's going on in there if you want to protect your IP. So those are 3 of the main causes that we see. Litigation protection is another one that we talked about earlier, where active monitoring plays a role. The new product that we launched, Spectre 360 Recon, is a passive monitoring solution. And what that means is you have a solution in place that's collecting all that same data, but it's logging it. It's logging it securely, but it's not making it available centrally for review, retention, and reporting. It's basically keeping that recording for 30 days. We can generate alerts off of it, so to help people understand if there is a reason or a cause to go take a closer look at somebody. But it's basically making that data available in case you need it. You know, Matt mentioned earlier in the case of an investigation in forensics where if you don't have a solution like ours in place, you've got to go and piece things together using the tools at your disposal, and then there are going to be holes. Well, you know, as an insurance policy, just knowing that we're collecting data for 30 days, no one looks at it unless we have a cause to. 31st day always drops off, so you're not creating a bunch of storage issues or having massive bandwidth impacts or anything like that. There's a lot of peace of mind that comes from knowing that that data is available if we need it, and if we have a cause, we can go and unlock that data and take a look at it. And just to give you a quick contrast between the two products and how they work, you know, in the active monitoring solution, all of those different data types that we discussed a couple of slides ago are collected. That data is pushed into a data store. We write to a central SQL database. It's always on premises. And then activity alerts and keywords alerts are sent out to the operators that the company deems appropriate to receive that information. And they have the ability to go in and review and analyze what's going on. Pretty much exactly what Matt showed you earlier. So that's Spectre 360. That's the active monitoring solution. In Recon, the passive monitoring solution, we're collecting all that same data. We're storing it for 30 days locally in an encrypted, obfuscated file. And only alert data is pushed out, right? And that alert data is stored in a subset of the SQL database in case you guys want that alert data available to you. And then the alerts are relayed out to whomever is deemed appropriate within the company to be receiving that information. And just as a quick point on that, you know, I don't think when you guys signed up to be IT professionals, you necessarily signed up to be judge and jury on your coworkers. We want you to be aware of the solutions and that they're out there, but these alerts can go to anybody in the company. So depending on what your goals are and what you've implemented, if you're monitoring for inappropriate language, let's say in the workplace, indications maybe of sexual harassment or whatever, those alerts can go to HR, and they can determine what they want to do with them. They're going to come back to you and ask you to unlock the data if they see a need to, but that's coming from HR now. You could be monitoring for fraud indicators. Those alerts should be going to somebody, you know, if the company's large enough, the office of the CFO, the corporate controller, whoever's charged with the fiscal health of the company, maybe the CEO, the owner, depending on company size, and they can decide what they want to do with them. So it's really about getting the information to the right person that can make a decision on, do we have cause to take a closer look at what an employee is doing. So that's the meat of what we wanted to discuss today. We wanted to kind of run through those 5 reasons to consider implementing an employee monitoring solution, talk a little bit about what is something that we encounter as a question or an objection in the selling cycle, and hopefully give you some things to think about around that. And then want to make available to you a brand new white paper that we've written. This is actually the first time it's been available. And it's a guide to implementing an employee monitoring program. It contains some of the ideas and concepts that we talked about today, and some others as well. And then buried in that document at the end is a link to a sample acceptable use policy for those of you that are looking to get that in order. And we've had that out before, and that's been a very well-received document as well. So I encourage you to go out to the link, and I know that that'll be available in the recording as well, and to pull down the white paper, and I hope that it's helpful to you. So that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar today. So I'm not sure